today's episode, we will be featuring a brave and talented man who is leaving his mark in the film industry. After his life took a dark turn with a struggle with a very rare form of cancer and the loss of his best friend, he has been rebuilding his life physically, mentally, and creatively. He is now a very talented director, writer, and editor, and bases most of his work in Taiwan. His short films have won numerous awards as he combines his experiences with abstract themes to produce his art. Nick Vaky, welcome to Multispective.
Why don't we start off with a little bit about like your line of work? What sort of inspired you to get into media?
Oh, deep question. I always really enjoyed films and art, and I grew up in a kind of my family was like a theater family, and my dad would always kind of impress upon us the importance of like going to museums and watching films and all this kind of stuff. When I was in like junior high, with my little brother who was in elementary school, we made all of these like short superhero films for him. His name is Paris. They were called Super Paris. And we would like in the summer when I would visit my dad, we would like write these scripts and shoot these movies. And it was pretty cool because like my dad would like let each of us, like if we wanted to write a script, we could just like write it about whatever. And they were always about this character, Super Paris. So it was like a superhero thing, but they would always be, you could do whatever you wanted. So I wrote like kind of weird, funny stuff or whatever. And it was pretty fun. And then we would film them together. And at first it was like on a camcorder. So we would edit it in the camcorder. And then we started to like actually pay to go to an edit bay and like sit and edit the movies together. So it's a pretty cool thing to do as a kid.
That's so cool.
That's awesome. Were there like any inspirations, or was your inspiration your dad? Because you said your dad's a playwright. He writes plays.
He writes plays. He's a director. He produces a lot of his own plays and stuff like that. And he is like an acting teacher as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow.
Would you say you were more inspired by like plays or film?
That's a good question. I mean, I was exposed to theater a lot when I was a kid because even my dad was a playwright and stuff. But my mom worked in theater as like a lighting designer. So I would always be in the theater when I was a little kid. Like I would run around like the audience and stuff while she was building a sets and stuff like that. Yeah. So I think theater probably from like a really young age had a really big impact on me. But when I got a little bit older and was in high school and stuff, I think more film, because I would, I would sit and stay up all night and watch a bunch of movies and stuff like that. So, yeah. I mean, I think they kind of all go together in a way, but definitely I always kind of knew that I was going to do something related to the arts.
That's awesome. And it must have definitely helped that like when you were young, your parents really let you sort of be free and explore like all the thoughts and ideas that you had. Like nothing was too crazy. Nothing was like, there were no like boundaries in a sense, which kind of allowed you sort of really express yourself freely.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, interesting.
Was there a film that made you you wanted to invest your entire life? Was there a film that hit that switch in your brain?
I can't think of one right now. Let me think. A film that made me want to do it. I mean, like as of all like kind of film bros from like who grew up in the 90s, like Fight Club and those kind of movies, Tarantino movies and stuff like that had a big impact. But I think like even earlier than that, like a film that really captured me was The Great Escape. My dad showed me that when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And I loved that movie when I was a kid. I used to watch that movie all the time. Mm-hmm.
It's an old one.
Yeah, it's really old. It's from like 60s, I think.
Oh,
it has Steve McQueen in it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they really got to rely on their acting because they never had the special effects or any of that. So
Yeah, but they did have like big set budgets and stuff, which I think is really cool. Like the way that films used to be made, but they would like build all these super elaborate sets, and it was all kind of real and tactile, like everything that was in the movie.
Right. So all of this was sort of happening when you were young, when you were in Hawaii. Yeah. Am I right?
Well, my dad lived in Minneapolis, and my mom, she got divorced from my father. She moved to Hawaii and she took us there. So I would go back and forth. I lived in Hawaii during the school year, and then I would visit my dad in the summer.
Right. So, and then you moved over to Taiwan and sort of get into the field in sort of more the Asian film industry. Did you ever work in the US in the film industry?
No, not really. I mean, I was in school. I went to Emerson, which you get a lot of experience at that school. I think the real focus of Emerson is like working on people's projects and helping out. So you do a lot of stuff when you're in school. So I worked on a lot of stuff then. I did work at like MIT for a little while, like in lab working with one of this thing called Next Lab, where it was like making like little documentaries about cell phone technology, but that was about it.
Wow.
So why did you choose Taiwan? Why did you want to immigrate there?
Well, when I was at Emerson, they had an exchange program to go to Taiwan for a semester. And I went, and I really, really liked it when I went for that. And I actually had a really good professor. His name was Dante, who's an Italian guy who worked in the Italian film industry. And he was teaching at the school, Shishin, which is like the film school, a pretty big film school here. And he was pretty influential to me, like the way he thought about film and the way he talked about editing and stuff. I always thought was really cool. So I always had like a really good kind of connection with my time in Taiwan. And so when I graduated and I kind of didn't really know what I wanted to do, I just felt like going back to Taiwan just seemed like it made sense. Yeah. So I went here and I got into a master's program here, and then I stayed ever since.
Sweet. Yeah. I read on your website, you studied communications there, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I went to Janda after that, and I studied international communications.
Wow.
Why did you choose that field specifically? And like, how does it connect to media for you?
So that program is pretty interesting because it's like you have a little bit of freedom. You're allowed to do like kind of media studies stuff when you're there. So it's communications, but it's pretty broad. So it can be, interpersonal communication, or it could be kind of news, but it can also be kind of media studies. So there was a lot that kind of connected. I mean, yeah, I also kind of always liked like academic stuff, and like, I like the hands-on side of like making things, but I also always liked the kind of academic stuff of like doing studies about whatever. I kind of got that out of my system though, doing a master's degree after I had to learn stats and stuff. I was like, okay, I'm good.
Did it help with your writing? Because you wrote 2 films and the writing on it, it's exceptional. Did you learn writing through the master's program over there as well? The communications?
I mean, I always liked writing. Actually when I was when I was young-ish, like junior high, I kind of probably wanted to be a writer more than anything else. So I used to write short stories when I was a kid all the time. And yeah, I think writing for me is something that feels the most natural, I would say.
I suppose as well, like communication in the film industries, I mean, like studying communication can be really applicable to film as well, in the sense that like, I noticed that a lot of the films that you do, they're quite abstract, right? So getting a message across through abstract means, it can be quite difficult. So communication in that sense can be really interesting kind of addition to it, in that how do I get a message across, but not by doing it so directly and kind of leaving it open to interpretation. There's a connection, there's a link there too, isn't there?
Yeah, maybe. I never thought about it like that, but that sounds pretty good.
I want to talk a little bit about your work. You have two great short films that I've seen, Effects and Everything Rises. One got awarded. I think it won some awards, but the Effects one was amazing. It's really abstract, and you really like it applies to everyone. The way you wrote it. When I was watching it, you do these analogies in there in the writing. I think one for Effects, it was the typhoon analogy, and like how a typhoon has an effect on the farming, and with the cabbages, and the cabbages, become a higher price. So everything has an effect on something. And with Everything Rises, you had that sunrise and the sunset, two sides of the same coin, and it doesn't really matter which way you watch it in, because in one character is going forward and one character is going back in time. How do you come up with these abstract ideas?
I kind of, I think it's a little bit of a cop out to say it's just like inspiration, but I think for me, when I write something, I try to latch on to something that I find interesting, like an idea that I find interesting, and then expand out from it. And then once I write a draft, then I try to kind of tease out what is like the important, or like the main idea of what it is after that. So with Everything Rises, I had just come up with this interesting idea of one person moving forward and one person moving backward. And then once I got that idea out, then I could explore a little bit about, okay, so what does this mean? What's the metaphor here that gives it a little bit more meaning than just something that's interesting?
Yeah. How much of your work is going with the flow, feeling the emotions of the moment, and how much of it is like, structured and planned out and, followed to the T?
I would say probably like 90% just going with the flow. I think with a lot of, like, even with other aspects of filmmaking, like with editing and with directing, you need to plan, because if you don't plan, then you're gonna have problems. But I think for me, something that's really important is being able to experiment and take chances when you're doing things, and not be like, have your plan, but don't be so stuck to your plan that you don't see that, like, while you're filming, there's a cool moment happening, or while you're editing, like, actually these shots might go together better, or while you're writing, maybe it's about something different. Maybe it's not about what you think it's about. So I think going with the flow is I won't say is more important, but it's as important as having a good plan.
A lot of creatives, they always talk about this flow state where you kind of just get lost in your work and you're creating. Do you ever feel that? Do you ever get into that?
I think that there's a really good concept of that, where it's like, a lot of times you feel like you just should get in the flow, but I think that flow state comes with kind of putting in reps and doing it a lot. And then the flow state comes. I think it's really similar to like being an athlete, where you have to practice a lot, but then when you do, and the movements, then you're able to pull them off without focusing. And that's actually when you really get really good, and you can do things that are pretty amazing when you're not thinking. But before you can get to that point, you need to force yourself to work a lot. You need to force yourself to sit down and write, even if you don't feel like.
So the film industry, it's so vast. I want to know, why did you choose the Asian film specifically? Why did you want to get into that?
I think it's just kind of going with the flow again. Where, I was here but being kind of ended up here in Taiwan. And when I was here, I just wanted to keep creating. So kind of made sense to try and do things here, because I was here.
Because on your YouTube channel, like, most of the movies that you review, you go over, they're all mostly Asian films from what I've seen. Like Everything Everywhere All at Once. I've seen some other Asian movies that I can't recall now. Do you have like an affinity towards Asian movies? Do you enjoy Asian film more than you do other film?
No, I wouldn't say that I enjoy it more, but I do think for the YouTube channel, Mint Volcano, that I do, where I review mostly Asian films. I chose that as the topic for the YouTube channel, mostly because I think a lot of times people, they're a little underrepresented. I think people know certain, Korean films were kind of big in the West recently, and Japanese films were big for a little while. But I don't recall like ever learning about Taiwanese films that much, or even Chinese films that much. So it's kind of like, I just wanted to talk about these films that I liked a lot, and hopefully my channel's tiny, but hopefully shine a little bit of a spotlight on some of these films that I think are really great that a lot of people don't know about. Like Edward Yang, I think, is like one of the best filmmakers of all time, and I didn't learn about him in university, and I went to film school. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's great that they're getting more exposure now, and you've been in that before it was even a trend. You did it before it was cool, because like now you have Parasite, and now you have Squid Game, and you have all of these Asian film and Asian media and Asian art that's really popping off right now, especially in the Western areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good for globalization to go both ways,
So I want to move on to talking a little bit about you and sort of your story as well. The last time that we spoke, you did mention that you had a bit of a health scare. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. Well, when I was living out here, I mean, I moved out here in 2009. That's when I moved out here, like permanently. Right. And after living here for a while, in about 2013, I think, I started to get a lot of pain in my stomach, my abdomen. I didn't know what it was. I went to the hospital multiple times to get it checked, and nobody ever knew. Like, they were saying, oh, maybe you just hurt your back or something like that. And then one day I woke up and I had like intense pain. I couldn't walk. And I went to the hospital and they gave me a CT scan, and I found out that I had a tumor that was like the size of a grapefruit, I guess, in my abdomen. And so they ran a bunch of tests on it, and for a few weeks they didn't know where it came from or why it was there. But they knew it was cancerous. They just didn't know what kind. And if they can't determine like the cause of a cancer, then they can't really treat it. So for like a good 2-3 weeks, basically I was thinking I had a death sentence. But eventually I decided to go to a different hospital, and they did a biopsy on it, and they found out that it was just a kind of rare form of testicular cancer that didn't present in the testicles, and it was just ended up being a tumor. So there was a treatment plan for that, but it was, I ended up having to do chemotherapy, and eventually had to go back to the United States to get surgery to remove the tumor.
Right. Was it something that they couldn't, like, there was no way, they didn't have the resources, the tools to do that in Taiwan? Because I thought that medical care. Yeah,
they do have really good healthcare, and they normally probably could have, but it had spread into my vena cava, which is a main artery system for the bottom half of your body. And in order to get rid of that part of the tumor, they had to basically clip off my blood supply. They need a machine to reroute your blood while they're doing the surgery, and they didn't have that here. So I had to find a hospital that did have that in order to get the surgery, and thankfully I was able to do that.
Yeah, that's hectic.
So you did the surgery in Hawaii, and then after the surgery...
No, actually in DC, where
DC.
My dad lives.
Oh, okay. So after they did the surgery, how did the outlook for you look after that?
I mean, after the surgery was really tough. Like, recovering from the surgery was really hard. I had a lot of kind of weird complications after the surgery. Like, the bottom half of my body swelled up. It's called the edema, I think, where like you get like a bunch of fluid in your body. So I had like legs the size of tree trunks, and relearning how to like walk and all that stuff was really hard. So it took couple months before like I was actually like, they told me, oh yeah, after a couple weeks you'll be fine, you'll be done. But it took like a few months before I was actually able to leave the hospital. And so that was pretty hard. I think that was more like a mental kind of struggle than like, because everybody kept saying it'll be fine eventually, but when you're in it, you kind of feel like it's never going to end. So it's pretty rough.
You mentioned that it was like quite a rare form of cancer as well. So, you know, I guess that must have been really, really scary in terms of like for you. And do you know like what stage you had gotten to?
3B. So if I had waited any longer, it probably would have been, you know, not, I wouldn't have, it wouldn't have been good. 3B is kind of like the stage that after where it was for me is, and it was already spreading into my arteries and stuff. After that, it goes to the lungs. And once it goes to the lungs, then it's, you know, there's not really much they can do after that.
Was there ever a time where like, what I want to know is what did it do to your mental health? Did you ever feel like hopeless? Did you ever feel like giving up during this time? Initially, when they didn't know what it was, definitely. Yes. Once they found out how to treat it though, then I was able to stay pretty positive. But, you know, there's ups and downs that come with being in the hospital, I think. And especially when you're doing chemotherapy and you're on all these weird drugs, like it definitely messes with your brain a little bit. I can recall feeling like some serious anxiety about having to go through chemo again, like before it started, and being like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, please, can this be over already? So what did it do for your art? I mean, you're very artistic and you love creating. How did it have an effect? Were you still creating at this moment, or did you just put a hold on it?
I think in some ways it did. It did help, and in other ways it kind of stagnated it. Like there was both, because on one hand, like I was feeling like, you know, I'm going through this super serious health thing. Like, what does it matter if I create anything? Like, what's the point? Kind of that kind of vibe. But on the other hand, like there would be days when I would write stories or write poetry or write things or draw or do all these different things. And that definitely did make me feel a lot better. I wrote a script about like a zombie script about a guy that like his vomit is toxic. Which was
Do you reckon like that's sort of like a reflection of the chemotherapy, and do you feel like there was a connection?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. You'd also written a couple of poems during that time. I recall. I would love to hear maybe one of the poems if you'd like to read one.
I don't know. Reading this they're kind of personal. I don't know if I can read this credibly.
Yeah, that's okay.
All right, let me give it a try.
Okay.
Awesome.
Picked up sand always leaks through the cracks in my fingers. My knowledge of this fact will not stop its flow. Squeezing tightly will not stop its flow. Lamenting its passing will not stop its flow. Kissing you 1,000 times always burns into my heart the pain of all the times not spent with your lips against mine. The pain of years before I met you. The fear of a time when I cannot know you. And yet the wave of your touch and the look of your skin seems to wash through me as regular as the tide. And although the moon may one day explode, the sun may drift too close and set our waves to a boiling heat that burns the skin from our bones, melts our eyes and brains, sets alight our hair and blood. At least our hearts will turn to sand and rub together when the tide comes in.
Oh, that's beautiful, man.
Yeah, that's really deep.
There's like a sense of like, you know, diminishing, but then there's like that hopefulness at the end of it, which I really like. We all turn to sand. That's beautiful, man. What do you call it?
You know, what did I call that one? I don't have a name for that poem, actually.
Untitled.
Have you ever entered any sort of like poetry competitions or like put it up anyway?
Not really, actually. That was the only time in my life I ever wrote poetry was when I was going through this, because I'd always done like scripts and stories and stuff like that. And I think at that time, because it was such an emotional time for me, that was kind of the only way I knew how to express myself. Was more just like more raw emotion kind of a vibe. Yeah. So it's funny that you asked me to read it, because like that kind of mindset that I was in at that time is like, it's very different from mostly how I tend to be a little bit more analytical about things.
Right. Interesting.
Oh, that's amazing.
Did you find that sort of to be somewhat therapeutic in a way, or was it more
Yes, definitely. I mean, it was very helpful to write stuff like that, because especially that one I wrote when I was really thinking that there were no treatment for me. So, it was just kind of like, I feel like I need to get something out there before I die. So I just wrote that.
Yeah.
That was beautiful. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. Did you feel like you had support, a lot of support at that time? Did you have a partner, your parents, friends? What was that like?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I had a lot of support, actually, luckily for me. Right at that time, my really good friend from school, Jesse, had just moved to Taiwan. He moved in with me and he was my roommate. And then also at that time, I just started dating my now wife, Sonia, who we literally just started dating like a month before I found out that I had cancer.
Wow. Yeah.
I'm glad you had that support. How long was the recovery process after that? After the surgery?
I think the chemo treatments were about 3 to 4 months. And then the surgery recovery was another 5 to 6 months. But I think even recovering after that and kind of getting back to like normal, healthy stuff, that's kind of been an ongoing thing for, years after.
So, I mean, you are no longer back in your hometown. You're not back in DC, or you're not back in Hawaii. You went back to Taiwan. What made you want to go back? I mean, having a health scare like that internationally away from your home can be quite jarring. What made you want to go back?
That's a good question. I mean, I think at the time when I had moved to get the surgery, in my brain, I had just kind of always thought of Taiwan as like where I lived. I had set up a life here. I had been here for 5 years at that point. And it just felt like when I was getting the surgery and I was doing the recovery, that was like separate. And in order to get back to like a normal life, I needed to go back to a place that I considered to be my home at the time. If I had stayed, it would have always kind of felt like I was living in this cancer treatment recovery domain. When being able to go back to Taiwan, it was kind of like, okay, this is finished now. And now I'm going to start moving on with my life. And whether or not I stayed forever didn't really matter, as long as I was able to kind of go back and kind of pick up where the cancer had kind of interrupted my path.
Oh, that's awesome, man. I'm glad you jumped back after that. It's very brave of you.
It's also like sort of maybe like the environment, like the change of environment as well. Sure. When you've gone through something so difficult like that, you just kind of want to go back to like normalcy after, right?
Yeah, for sure.
What would you say was like the hardest moment during this whole period for you?
So for me, the most difficult thing that happened actually wasn't really related to the cancer. It was that my friend Jesse, who helped take care of me during it, he passed away from a kind of heart condition that nobody knew he had. He was living in Japan after he moved to Japan, and he had just passed away in his sleep. pretty suddenly on my 30th birthday, incidentally. And so that was probably the hardest part. I mean, it wasn't related to the cancer, but in a way it kind of felt like it was, because he had helped me so much, and he had really, really helped me get through a lot of it. And then all of a sudden he was gone. So that was really tough.
I mean, that must have been difficult to process, because earlier you were saying how you were in a mindset of like accepting death for yourself, and then your good friend Jesse passes away. How did that make you, how did it make you feel?
I mean, there's a lot of, I think survivor's guilt is like a real thing. Like it's easier to deal with in a lot of ways when you're the one that is sick, or you're the one that's going through it, because, everything's about you. And then when somebody else passes away, you kind of feel like, you wish, there's a lot of things you wish you would have done. Like you wish you would have spent more time with them, or you wish you would have told them more, or, and I didn't ever get a chance to help him in the way that he helped me. So there's a lot of weird feelings that come up with that kind of thing.
Rest in peace, Jesse. So I watched your film Effects. Does that have anything to do with Jesse? Did that help you create that short film Effects? Because
100%. Okay. I think that film was in a lot of ways like a very kind of cathartic, way to deal with my feelings about all of that I hadn't been able to express. I mean, of course, there's a lot of people that love Jesse, and we had a service for him, and everybody talked about him and everything. But there's something a little different when you're able to express your feelings through art, because it's not like your friends want to sit and hear you talk about all this stuff all over and over and over again. But when you write a film, you get to think about it over and over and over again, and really kind of, at least for me, dive into what all the emotions I was feeling were, and kind of process it through creating something.
Yeah. I really enjoyed Effects. There was this scene where he was talking about the basketball. The basketball is either here or it isn't. And then his best friend, I don't know his name, but he was like, why can't it be here and not here at the same time? And I don't know, it just spoke to me so well. I've never lost someone dear to me, but I just resonated with it. It's so abstract, and it's almost magical, man. And the way you filmed it, it's like super dreamy. I'm not sure if you used because you weren't using a tripod. Were you using a gimbal or anything? It kept moving. Yeah. And again, it gave it more of like a dreamlike state. And that's pretty much what was going on. He was talking to someone that wasn't there the entire time. It was beautiful, man.
Yeah. Did you feel like you addressed some of the deeper feelings and thoughts that you had in that? So you mentioned the survivor's guilt. Did you feel like at some point you were able to express that and show that in the film?
Yeah, I do. I think that shows in the film, that the way that you feel when somebody's gone, and how you feel kind of mad at them for not being there, but also mad at yourself. And,
Yeah. Where are you now in terms of, I wouldn't say I don't know what the right word for this is, maybe just like processing it, accepting what has happened, and,
Yeah, I think it's a really tough thing. I mean, there was an interesting conversation I had at the service for him with this older guy who had talked about, he saw all of Jesse's friends came back, flew back to Hawaii, and he was like, yeah, it's really good that you guys all came back. When I was young, I lost a really good friend of mine, and I think about him every day. And this guy that we were talking to he was like 60 something, or late 60s. And I'm thinking, geez, you think about this guy every day, and it's been like 40 years.
Mm.
And I remember thinking, that's kind of tough. I don't know if I can handle that. But I would say I probably do think about Jesse every day.
Mm.
And it's not always like a bad thing. It doesn't mean that that you haven't moved on, because like there's lots of good memories that you can have throughout the day.
Right.
And then even, I'm sure there's probably been days where I haven't thought about him, but when he does pop back into my head, it's kind of like he never wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't really know the best way to kind of grieve, or if somebody's going through that. Like, I wouldn't really know what advice to give.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that it's a personal thing, and you kind of have to do it in whatever way feels right for you.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm glad you created effects, because now Jesse is immortalized. I mean, that idea stemmed from him and your experiences with him. So I feel like that's the one great thing with art. Like, again, with your poem, we all turn to dust, but like art, it stays with a person. It's like, creating an experience for someone that didn't experience it. So maybe people may not know Jesse, but because of Jesse, we have effects. And I think it's a beautiful thing.
And I think even beyond that, like, maybe if people aren't artists or they're not creating stuff, I think through the experiences that you have with people and the memories that you have with people,
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the important thing that kind of is able to continue. I think that's the kind of the idea that I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
get across with effects, is that, like, what really matters is the time that you have with other people.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you are missing someone, thinking about the time that you spent with them is a really good way to kind of honor their memory, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I quite agree with you in the sense that, like, introspection, sitting with your thoughts is something that's really important that maybe a lot of people try not to do, or sometimes maybe I even advise not to do. Like, try to distract yourself with things, go out, meet people, do the things that you love. But, you can push things aside into different corners, but then at some point it's going to resurface, right? And there has to come a point where you have to really sit with it and actually recognize those thoughts and feelings, and actually, do what you need to do to express it, to get it out, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when you're thinking about loss of somebody that you loved. I mean, you loved that person. So,
Mm-hmm.
Why would you want to forget them?
Yeah,
I think it's okay to think about them, as long as it doesn't like turn into like just this cycle of depression. But I mean, there should be a lot of happy memories when you consider someone that you love.
Yeah. At what point did it sort of like turn for you? Because I know you mentioned earlier at the beginning, it was a lot of guilt and maybe even anger over the fact that, he left when, he shouldn't have. And so when did that turn into like able to look into it and just be thankful for the times that you had with him, or just, happy memories, happy thoughts?
I would say that going to the service and being with, because we had a really tight group of friends in high school, that seeing everybody that knew him and loved him was probably the best part of that. And just being back on Maui and hanging out with everyone and talking about him and spending time together, and being able to spend time together with people that I hadn't seen in a really long time, and who, now I talk to more frequently. Like one of my friends, Levi, we're working, he's doing the music for a new film that I'm working on right now. So we talk all the time now, which is great. So I think when I reconnected with a lot of people was when it really helped.
So do you think after the loss of Jesse, you've changed the way you experience a friendship? Do you see friendship differently now?
I don't know. I'm not sure, but I think that definitely I am pretty conscious of enjoying moments with people that I care about and that I love. Just trying my best to maybe if I'm walking down the street with my wife running errands, I will be annoyed initially and be like, oh, I don't want to do this, but then take a step back and be like, you're spending time with somebody that matters to you. So even though you're doing something stupid, like this can be a good moment that you will maybe miss when it's gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. How much would you say of your work after all your experiences, everything that you went through, how much would you say your work has changed, or how much of your work is a byproduct of those experiences?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that, but I would say like completely, because aren't we, not to get like philosophical on you, but like, aren't we just a product of our experiences? Yeah. I'm not sure how to answer
or rather
that in a way
maybe
that
like, how is it
annoying?
Yeah, no, no, I see what you mean, right? Because it is, how do we define ourselves, right? We are a byproduct of those experiences. But I guess what I mean is like that specific experience that happened to you with realizing that you have cancer, the whole recovery process, the loss of your friend, that was sort of like a momentous turning point for you. Would you say that your art changed quite significantly from that point, or the way that you express yourself artistically in your work was quite different from sort of before that?
Yeah, actually, I think that you could say that, because I think probably before I was a little bit more afraid of kind of emotional stuff. Like for example, that poem, I don't think I would have ever written a poem like that before. I was more kind of interested in irony and things like this. But I think there's an important element of like being vulnerable and being honest that I enjoy much more now in art than I think I did before. Like I think a lot of stuff that tries too hard to be cool doesn't really appeal to me anymore, because I think it just doesn't feel real. Whereas I think it's okay to be vulnerable and be more emotional in what you create. And that's more interesting to me now. My dad was like that when I was growing up. He always like sappy stuff, and I always kind of thought he was lame. But the older I got, now I kind of get it more.
Yeah, for sure.
Nick, you went through a lot in your life, and even though you went through all of those experiences, you bounced back. What I want to know is like, if you have any tips for our listener, how do you stay hopeful even through all the turmoil? Like, what tips would you give our listeners?
I'm a big believer in kind of, a lot of things. Like I really like Stoicism as a philosophy. I think that it's very helpful, but I think it only takes you so far. So I do think there's a healthy mix of kind of putting in hard work and just not focusing not getting into like a whole woe is me kind of mindset, but also acknowledging those feelings and knowing that they're there, and like, oh yeah, I feel sad or I miss somebody, and like letting that emotion come, but also knowing that it will pass, and that if you keep going and you keep trying and you keep working, things will get better.
Yeah.
And what sort of like tips would you give to our listener with regards like being vulnerable? Like, would you say, what would you say one can do to let go of the guard or the wall and sort of be vulnerable?
I think an important thing is just being around people that you love and respect and that feel the same way about you. I think worrying so much about what people think of you. I used to do that all the time when I was younger, especially in like junior high. I think everybody was like that. But, like the more you kind of are able to just develop relationships that are built on kind of an understanding that the people that you love and that love you aren't going to judge you that much if you are honest and earnest with them. I think that that helps, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, I think. I think also, like, do you feel like maybe the passing of your friend and sort of like having that sort of surrounding of people who were there for you and who didn't judge you or didn't expect you to think or be a certain way, but just let you sort of go through your grieving process in your own way, allowed you to sort of like, you know, let those feelings out and those thoughts and emotions out, and in a sense kind of like maybe help you see the value in being vulnerable. So I think,
definitely.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
It's amazing. Nick, you have a story, and we thank you for being vulnerable with us. Right now, would you like to give any shout out? Would you like to give any updates on your upcoming work? Anything you got going on? Anything coming out soon? We know you're an artist. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I have my YouTube channel, Mint Volcano, on YouTube, which I review films and movies, but I also put up some of my own short films and work there. So I think that's a good place to check out some of my stuff. I also have my website, nickvaky.com. You can see some stuff there. Yeah.
We'll put that there in the description.
Follow me on Instagram at Nick Vaky.
Definitely.
Yeah,
we look forward to seeing all your work in the future. We'll be keeping track on that as well. Your artwork, your short films are amazing. So yeah, to our listeners, anyone who's listening to this, and if you have not had a chance to like tune in, definitely click in. There's some really, really great stuff in there and really thought-provoking things as well.
Definitely check out Effects. Check out Everything Rises. Your cinematography is just amazing, man.
Yeah.
I got to shout out then my good friend Luke, who he's does the cinematography on a lot of those. He's really great. Yeah, he's awesome. His Instagram is, I think, at LOMFOM.
LOMFOM.
I'll give you the link, because if you're gonna shout out cinematography, then we have to give him props.
Oh, for sure. Shout out to Luke.
Thank you so much, Nick, for being with us today. We really, really appreciate your time. If you enjoyed the episode and would like to help support the show, please follow or subscribe. Also, we would love to hear from you. Please give us feedback by rating and reviewing on any of our different platforms listed in the description.
We'd like to recognize our guests who are vulnerable and courageous enough to share their life experiences with the rest of the world. We appreciate your perspective. Thank you for showing us we are human. We would like to give a special thanks to our producer, videographer, sound engineer, and everything else in between, Joe Mills. The show would be nothing without you. I'm Joseph.
And I'm Jenica.
And we are Multispective.